Hebrews series, and I would just like to say I am sorry for the audio clip in the last video, because I don't know what happened to the audio, but I needed to get it uploaded, and I didn't have time to refilm, so sorry for that to start. And I'm also sorry that I missed uploading last week. It was crazy busy, so I will be uploading this week, obviously, since this video is going up. And yeah, that is all. We will be continuing in Hebrews chapter 11 this week. And before we get started, I would like to spotlight our tea of the day, as per usual. So today's tea of the day is by Good Earth, and it is their Wild Chaild chai tea. And I've done this one before, and honestly, it's not my favorite tea, but it's not that bad either. It just took me a little bit of getting used to, because it's, when you buy chai tea at the coffee shop, it's heavily sugared, and this one is not heavily sugared, so it just took a little getting used to, but it's not too shabby, but not my favorite either. So with that, before I ramble any longer, let's hop right into Hebrews chapter 11. So, as usual though, sorry, one last thing before we dive on in. As usual, I am reading from my English Standard Version Journaling Bible from Crossway Books, and yeah, we'll start off in verse 1. So it says, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen," which I'm going to pause because I like the English Standard Version, but I like how one of my other Bibles worded verse 1 better, so I wrote it down partially in this one. And in my other Bible, it talks about how we can have confidence in the things unseen, which I thought I like the word confidence more than conviction, although they both are useful. But anyways, continuing into verse 2, it says, "For the people of old received their commendation. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible." And I'm going to pause there again. And in my other Bible, again, I like the wording a teeny bit better in verse 2, and it said good reputation instead of commendation, so, But I also think that it's important for us to remember that we need to let our lives be one so that others won't say things that are bad of us. They only have good things to say about us because we show them love and we show them Christ-like hospitality, or not hospitality, but you know what I mean. We show them care and true. We want them to know that they're accepted, if that makes sense. And then also, I think I like verse 3 because it says, "By faith we understand that how the universe was created," because I think it's important for us to remember as Christians that no matter what anybody believes about how the world is created, they believe it by faith, whether they're evolutionists, whether they're creationists, whether they're a Christian that does the new, or the where they believe that God used evolution, whatever it is, however people believe that the world came into being, it does require them the faith to believe it, because yeah, that's just how it works. So moving into verse 4, it says, "By faith Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, God commending him by accepting his gifts, and through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. By faith Enoch was taken up, so that he should not see death, and he was not found, because God had taken him. Now before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God." Excuse me, I'm sorry. "And without faith it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who seek him." And I'm going to pause there. I just finished verse 6. But I want to back up to verse 5. When it talks about Enoch in verse 5, that's referring to Genesis 5:24, which talks about how Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. And then I think it's also important in verse 6 that it says, "Without faith it's impossible to please him." And whoever draw near to God and believe that, So I think it's important for us as Christians to remember that we really need to be living out our faith, and not just, saying, "Oh, hey, I'm a Christian, blah, blah, blah." If you're not living out your faith, you're really not being a Christ follower, because if you're following something, you start to take on what they do. You start to imitate what they are. You start to become what they are and what they project and preach, if that makes sense. So continuing on in verse 7, it says, "By faith Noah, who being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith." And I'm gonna just pause there. I don't know. I really like how the ESV words this because it's by faith in reverent fear, and it's the righteousness that comes by faith. And I think it's just so important how this chapter is really focusing on the having faith in God aspect of our relationship with Him. And continuing into verse 8, it says, "By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God." And I'm going to pause there. And I think that it's really important, especially using the story of Abraham, to remember that God's going to give us what He's promised us. It might not be in our lifetime, it might be in our children's or our children's children's, but God is faithful and He will come through with His promises. So continuing into verse 11, it says, "By faith Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants as many as the stars of heaven, and as many of the innumerable grains of sand on the seashore." And again, just verse 11 reminds us that God will always be faithful to His promises. And continuing into verse 13, it says, "These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth." And again, that's just a reminder to us that even though they didn't see the promises, they had the faith and they knew that God would remain faithful to them. And again, in our lives, that means that if He's promised us something, we might not be the ones to receive it. It might be our children or our children's children, but we still need to have the faith that He will come through with that promise. So continuing into verse 14, it says, "For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, and He has prepared for them a city." And I just want to pause there because I think that's really cool that, like, nothing on earth is ever going to be something that will truly satisfy us. And I think that that's really cool because that just reminds us that we have that desire and a need for God, and that we can only be satisfied in and through Him. And we will only be truly satisfied when we're with Him permanently in heaven. But I just think it's really cool to think that, like, there's nothing that can satisfy you except for God. And that's such a cool thought to me. But continuing on into verse 17, it says, "By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, 'Through Isaac shall your offspring be named,' which is in Genesis 21:12, which says, 'But God said to Abraham, Be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named.'" And continuing into verse 19, in Hebrews chapter 11, it says, "He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. By faith Abraham invoked the future blessing of Jacob and Esau. By faith Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. By faith Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones. By faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents, because they saw that the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict." Which, first of all, when you, because you think, everybody knows the story of Moses, and you think, oh, okay, whatever, it's his parents were hiding him, whatever. But, when you actually think about that, and the courage that it took to do that, it's insane. The king was slaughtering babies, and you just casually hide one, that takes so much guts and courage, and it's incredible to me. And I also just think it's so important to remember to be obedient to God, because there are going to be times in your life, because every believer faces this, where the world around you and the people around you are telling you that this is a bad thing, or that you can't do that, or that whatever, but you know that God is telling you to do that thing, and that even if it's risky, that's what He's telling you to do, and you need to be able to be obedient to Him and be able to, because obviously the people in our lives are trying to do what's best for us, but if we know what God truly has for us, and we know that, that's what he's telling us to do, even if it doesn't seem realistic or whatever to the people around us. We need to be able to have the courage to do those things that he's telling us to do. And I lost my spot, so 1 second. Verse 24, it says, "By faith Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them." And again, I think that it's important that when the Spirit speaks to you, you need to listen, even if it's difficult. And that's much easier said than done, obviously, but God's plan is always ultimately going to be better than yours will. So it's always better to listen to what he's saying. And then verse 29, continuing on, says, "By faith the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land, but the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies." And I want to pause there and just focus back on 29 and 30. And if you want to see God be splitting waters and taking down walls in your life, you need to be willing to be corrected, because it's better to have those things, at least in my mind, it's better to have walls come down and giants to fall and waters be split in your life than to have a pat on the back for how good you are. I would much rather be, corrected and be sent onto a better path than think that I'm on the right path when I'm not, if that makes sense. So, continuing into verse 32, it says, "And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, I always botch the names in the Old Testament, I'm sorry, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, and were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies in flight." Which I don't know. I love the Old Testament because I love reading those stories, because it's just insane to me that we can experience those things through faith, not because of anything that we have to do, but because God is like, I got you. If you have faith in me, I will come through. You know what I mean? Even if he comes through in a way that we don't want, but is really the right way. Verse 35 says, "Women received back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release, so that they might rise again to a better life." And I'm going to pause there, because it's just really important, as verse 35 reminds us, to be focusing on the life after this one and not just what we have here on earth, because ultimately what we have here is going to fade away. So continuing to 36, it says, "Others suffered mocking and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains, and in dens and caves of the earth. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect." And I think it's really, verse 36 through 40 just reminds us that the life of the Christian is not going to be an easy one, but it's going to be a worthwhile one for us in the long run. And it's also just really crazy to think that, do you have a faith like the people did in these times? Do you have a faith where you would be willing to go through all of that if you knew that you personally would not receive the promise, but the people after you would? Because that's really all that matters is Jesus. And you need to really evaluate, is that all that matters in your life, or is it not? And it's crazy to me. But I'm just going to say, I love Hebrews. I'm really sad we're coming to the end of the series. But I hope you guys, after chapter 11, you guys really want to just figure out, what it is that God has for you. And that once you figure out what that is, and it's not something that's an instantaneous thing where, well, usually it's not, where God just tells you, bam, this is what you're going to do with your life. It takes time, and it takes really trying to spend time with him and figure out, where he might be leading you. But I really hope that after this, you guys try and figure that out. And once you figure it out, you do it with everything you've got. And you really, really seek to please Him and Him alone, and not do it for your own good, but to do it for His good, if that makes sense. Like, don't be doing things so that you can be better than so and so. Do it because you want to help the people around you grow in their faith and help just grow in the faith in general. Because when you are truly doing the will of God, that's when you're going to see the giants fall. That's when you're going to see walls crumble. It's when you're going to see so much transformation and just amazing things happen in your life. And yeah, I don't know. I hope you guys enjoyed Hebrews chapter 11. Sorry it was a little all over the place. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you did, feel free to leave a like on the video, and if you are not a part of our tea and God-loving community, feel free to subscribe or join us on Instagram, where I do more daily, or at least multiple posts a week. And if you think that this video could benefit somebody that you know, please feel free to share it with them. And as always, if you leave this video knowing nothing else, I hope you know how precious and loved you are by the God who created you, and I hope you guys just have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.